So in this video I'm going to talk about pictorial drawings. Now there's two different types of pictorial drawings that we're interested in. We have oblique drawings, which are good when we have one face with detail, and they're drawn at they're slanted. Oblique means slanted, and they're slanted to the side. Oblique muscles are on your side. The oblique is slanted to 45 degrees into the distance. Also, we have isometric. So isometric, we have both sides are slanted at a smaller amount at 30 degrees. Now the advantage of pictorial drawings is that they are good at showing a general overview of an object. Now they're less good, the disadvantage is that they're not very good at showing complicated dimensions. So we typically use orthogonal drawings for things that have a lot of detail, a lot of dimensions. But this is still very useful for things with more information. Now as of 2018 when I'm recording this, there has not been a question in the last 5 years on you actually drawing an isometric drawing. Now that could mean that we're due, or it could mean that they're no longer being tested as heavily. Now in both of these cases I've drawn this object, or it's a square version of this object. So I think it gives a pretty good idea. Now both of them still are not truly lifelike. A more lifelike representation would be a perspective drawing, but perspective drawings are much more difficult to draw, at least without computers. Now, when I mark something like this, I'd say that there's probably worth 4 marks at a guess. Now, the 4 marks that I'd be looking at, so this drawing here that I've drawn, it's going to be 2 out of the 4 marks. Now, that's assuming that I've drawn this more or less at the right scale, and I'd say that the 4 marks is 2 marks is being generous. So, assuming that it's drawn at the right scale, I can tell the difference between light and dark, but this line here is a little bit too far off for me to be happy with that shape. If we compare it to this one here, this one's a much more consistent shape, so that the shape being a little bit off, that's probably going to take off a mark. And the other mark is missing is because it's missing a line. So if I draw this again from scratch, we'll see how I feel at if I draw a new one. Now the advantage of drawing oblique is that it's good if you have detail on just one face only. So if I'm drawing my object, I can draw my front view and then I just extend my lines off at 45 degrees. Now technically the syllabus requires you only to be able to draw freehand. Okay, I'm a little bit more happy with the square. Technically you are supposed to draw freehand, but I would suggest that using your set squares to get your accuracy of your lines is a good idea, and it doesn't take that much longer to use the set square. Now, once I've got this shape, I'm now going to draw in to the right scale this object here and this object here. Now I forgot that line there, and I'm going to draw this line in, meeting up with it. Now, the mark that I'm going to deduct here is that I have drawn construction lines, but those lines are as dark as my finished lines. So where we have thickness of line is important when we're doing orthogonal drawings. So we have to have thin center lines and thin hidden detail lines and thin dimensioning lines. Here I'm interested in the dark and light lines. So I don't need to rub things out, but as long as if I draw my object lightly first and then go over it again, and this time pressing darker, as long as I can see a distinction between light and dark lines, I will give you the mark. So there's a mark for more or less being the right shape at the right angles. There's a mark for being at the right scale and having the right features. There is a mark for difference between line types, and there is a mark for not forgetting any objects. So that would be my marks there, and here the same thing. If I left in lines, or I'll draw this one using 2 pens so that you can see the idea of me not having to rub things out. So my blue pen is a little bit lighter, so what I would do in reality is when I'm drawing this, I would draw this object and I just either use a different pencil. So the recommendation is that you use a 2H and then go over it with a HB pacer. But between you and me, if someone uses any pencil and they just use very light lines, a pacer is definitely recommended because you'll get accuracy of your lines and line thickness. But if you go over it very lightly the first time round and then go over it more darker the second time round, I will be happy with that. Okay, so if I was marking that, that's 3 marks because I have left out this line and this line. So now I'm going to say that assuming that everything is to scale, and if assuming I used a ruler, I would give that 4 marks, 4 out of 4. Okay, so that is what we're looking for isometric drawings and oblique drawings. I'll draw one more object just to give you the idea. Now, if I'm drawing this object, now I'm going to use these, assume that these are 10mm by 10mm blocks, that this all fits within a 10mm by 10mm block. Now if I'm drawing this object, well first of all I'll draw it in this method. If I draw my face view, I'm going to say that this blue is the face view, the front face. Now I would be using a ruler to measure these, but I'm doing it on the board, so once I have my object, I then can use my set square to draw these lines all at 45 degrees. I would then measure this line out and draw down and down. And not forgetting that line because I'll lose a mark. Okay, so now that I've got my object, assuming that I've drawn everything to the right scale, and that I've drawn, when I say to the right scale, it means that I haven't drawn the object. For instance, if I had drawn the object much longer, or if the shape was distorted, that would be the mark. So one mark is for the shape being more or less correct, to the right dimensions. A shape is for quality of your line work, so that you've used one solid line. So one thing I don't like is when people feather lines. That is a big no-no. Don't ever do feathered lines. If you are doing it freehand, do it once, do it right. If you're using a ruler, it's much easier to get a line right the first time round. So that's my oblique drawing. Now I'm going to draw the same object again. This time I'm going to draw it as an isometric. So I'm going to draw my light lines first. Now, if I didn't draw this at the right ratio, I would lose a mark. It's always important to consider how much space you're going to need. Now, a term that people use when drawing an isometric is they talk about starting with a crow's foot. The crow's foot is this shape down the bottom here, and I'm concerned, so this is generally the right idea, but this angle, when I look at it with my set square, so I also have set squares here that are designed to give me 30-degree angles. So I'm more or less, the shape is otherwise good, but this has been drawn not at 30 degrees, but at 45 degrees. That's a different kind of drawing. That's called axiomatic, or axometric. And that is used by architects, but it's not one of the 2 accepted pictorial drawings that we use in this subject. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my crow's foot by positioning my set square on the page, measuring from the corners of the page. And then from here I can measure all of my dimensions out. So this is 3 units, 2, 3 units. And then this is 2 units across and up. Once I produce my blocks, 4 units up, making sure that I have my angle correct. So 3 units gets me there. 3 units. 4 units. Okay, so I've drawn my rough version of the drawing. I've drawn my angles correctly. Line quality, I'm doing all in a single line. Now that's a little messy. That could be enough to lose me a mark. Or to lose me half a mark. Now, how many marks? Well, so I've done two problems here. One, although I can tell the difference between my construction lines and my non-construction lines, so I still get that mark there, I lose a mark for not including that line there, and this line here is also a mistake. So even though it's a construction line that I've accidentally darkened, that's a mistake, the same way that not including a line that you shouldn't is just as bad as including a line that you should. Okay, so that's my isometric. And just to help out, I will write the angles. This one here is at 45 degrees, and this one here is at 30 degrees, 30 degrees. This shape here is what we call the crow's foot, that shape there. And that's how we start off. Even though things are going to the distance, we still always, everything is the correct dimension. We don't change it. We only do that for a perspective drawing. That's not what we're doing in this subject. A pictorial drawing gives you an overview, a general overview of the shape. Make sure that you get the scale right. Try not to leave any gaps like I've done there. Again, it's sort of half a mistake. So I probably wouldn't take a whole mark off for that, but you get the idea. Okay.